Welcome once again to Natural 2, our unscripted tabletop talk show.
Mhm.
And this week is an interesting topic to me, at least. I am going to pick Nathan's brain about AI art. And right up front, I want to say that maybe the more accurate term is text to image interfaces or text to image algorithms. Because if I correct me here, if I understand the technology on just a very surface level, it's not that we're not we're not talking about an artificial intelligence that is, responding to your question and expressing itself through art. So therefore it is not art
Mhm.
in the strictest sense. But rather it sounds like it is sampling tens of millions of artists' pictures and then using that to cobble together something that fits your keywords.
Yeah, so what you're doing is you're giving it a prompt. There is a whole argument going on currently about how Chat GPT, I think is what it's called, which is the AI chat text generator, could start feeding prompts to the AI generator and then create that feedback loop. But for now, the technology that everyone's kind of talking about is you have a program where you feed, again, keywords and certain organized patterns, like, if one is ahead of the other, then it's more picked up in the prompt or in the rotation or the weight of what it is generating. If you put certain syntaxes and stuff on things, that also adjusts it. And that's the broad stroke of it, is you feed the machine what you are looking for, and you learn to kind of how to tweak the knobs and, change the recipe to get an outcome you're looking for, and then you go from there. So yeah, I think they are called text to image generators, or text to image prompts is kind of the terminology I imagine you would use.
And here at the top of our discussion, this is something that has been on my mind for maybe years. I mean, the discussion about automation and the ethics and everything else is not a new one. And so I think I speak for both of us here at Natural 2 when I say that uh, support artists, be fans of artists. Um, we don't want artists to go away. And this is not, in my opinion, going to replace artists.
Mhm. It, yeah.
It's a tool, it's a toy at this stage, and it is not. It couldn't replace a human brain and a human hand and a human eye. Uh, so support artists, be fans of artists. This is not the new, this is not the new artist uh for our society here.
Well,
Um,
I agree and I disagree to some extent. There are people in the space that hold your view, and there are people in the space that stand staunchly against your view. There's a whole depth to this, which I'm gonna try and touch on in the shallowest way possible, while also paying credit to where some of these things need to go. The best analogy that I've seen, and this isn't really one to one, but it helps kind of contextualize a lot of the conversation, is a lot of this, fire and rage and energy and outcry came around when photography was kind of being adopted into the art space. A lot of people use the argument of, if you're just using a machine to capture a moment in time, there's no art to that. You're not doing anything. You're not sitting there expressing yourself. You're just clicking a button. And that conversation has kind of been retread with the AI generation, is, oh, you're not actually making this art. You're not doing anything with this. It's the computer doing it for you. And where usually that conversation kind of concludes is, this is another tool that people can use. Whether or not it extends further past that and we do start getting these AI generation mills that just spit out image after image after image, maybe. Currently it is a lot more towards the, an artist or someone with an artistic eye or creativity needs to guide this tool to have a result that is usable or decent. So that's at least where we're at now, but that could change very quickly. So that's the kind of an introduction to it.
So maybe the operator can be an artist,
Mhm,
um, but the idea that the various text to image generators is a replacement for an artist is not one that I don't want to subscribe to that. But I can hear the corporate leaders of our society just bouncing in their chairs at the thought. But
mhm. Well, there
we'll
are
move
a
on.
few businesses who have already used AI art in their marketing and whatnot, so it's getting there and it is there. But again, kind of outside the scope of today's video. So,
Um, but at any rate, I well, I have a thought about how you can maybe try to engage with the best of both worlds, but
mhm.
maybe we'll talk about that at the end. It seemed like I was just hearing, like, I saw a news headline about how there was a text to image generator, and it was like behind a beta paywall or something. You had to be invited to use it, and then a
Yeah.
week later, I'm getting ads on my phone for phone apps that I can download to do the same thing.
Mhm.
What the heck?
So acknowledging my shortcomings, because I am not an AI art historian and I'm trying not to portray myself as something that I am not, a video that I highly, highly recommend. And if you don't like my take or don't like any of the takes that you hear on the internet right now, this is definitely the best condensed version of what AI art has been in the past couple months. It is a video by Knows Best Never. I will link it down in the description below. But basically, it covers the whole like conception of our modern AI art understanding and where it is currently, and it's framed basically between like what artists are saying and what the AI actually is. But to give a very brief introduction, Dolly was the first one to really publicly release kind of a tool for text to image generation, and it was kind of like a joke, and everyone's like, "Oh, look at the funny smeared faces and the person with 7 fucking hands and like all that kind of stuff." And then it very quickly, after gaining a little bit of popularity, got refined, got more attention, got money behind it, got organizations and businesses behind it, and then it went open source. And then once something goes open source in our modern day, it's everywhere. And once it got everywhere, and there were results that were being gained from it that were striking and interesting and cool, everyone's like, hey, I want to try. And here we are. So it's really only been a couple months and it has gone from 0 to 100 real quick.
Hard in a nutshell is it to get started? I I how much does it cost? I think there are
Mm-hmm.
some that are supposedly free, but
Mm-hmm.
we all know how that goes.
That's a variety of answers, but the broad strokes is there are tools now online due to its popularity where you can go to a website and pay $10 and generate 1,000 images a month or something. That's a very common subscription kind of thing now. Midjourney kind of goes off of that policy, and I guess a real quick thing is Midjourney. Stability AI, which is also Stable Diffusion, Dolly are kind of the three big AI art generators in the space right now. Google's working on one, but that's not in the public sphere currently. But yeah, there are websites you can go to, pay a fee, and do it. There are GitHub pages and open source, articles and repositories that you can access where you download the software locally on your computer, run it yourself. There's a whole spread. But yeah, the two main routes are you set it up on your own PC, use your own hardware, and kind of use the technology that's been provided to you, or you pay for a server farm to do everything for you, and you just kind of interact with I guess, the web UI that you're presented with.
So here's a really broad question now, and we already talked about this before we started, that this video is not going to be a how-to.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that that might maybe sort of will be its own topic someday,
Mm-hmm.
perhaps. Um, this is just an overview. Having said that, how does it work? How do you use the one that you use?
Mhm. So I'm gonna keep plugging videos that I think kind of go into a bit more depth than me, just to again kind of help point you in directions that you might want to go. Shadiversity actually did a very decent video, it's about an hour and a half, breaking down a lot of the arguments against AI art and kind of showcasing in a more approachable way how the actual technology works. It's not perfect, but it's better than most. Um, but as far as you're talking about, Stable Diffusion is the one that I use, to be upfront about it, and I use it locally on my own hardware, and I've been using it since the 1.5 release, and we're now on the 2.1 release, and that's something that's also going to be kind of difficult to explain, is every release of Stable Diffusion, and even community release versions of Stable Diffusion, kind of sometimes will have different filters or like resources that they will pull from, like stable diffusion 2.1 and past now are trying to create an opt-out system where artists can say, I don't want to be part of the training, or like very dense copyright stuff like the Getty Images thing is another thing. So there are multiple different versions of just a single piece of this puzzle, and then there are multiple pieces to the entire puzzle. But getting that all kind of out of the way, the way that a diffuser model works, and this is again the dumbed down version of it, and I could very easily get this wrong, but my best understanding is it samples as many images as it can. And as far as I'm aware, Stable Diffusion uses an independent data scraping resource that they, buy the rights to and then use for their training. And it's something in the ballpark of like billions plus of images that it uses. And then it goes through all these images and identifies what's in the image and the prominent things, and then gets like metadata from it. I don't know if that's a correct term, but it doesn't copy the image. It just learns from the image and then stores that in kind of like a pool it can pull from. So then when someone sits down and takes the technology and types in, dog with red ball on car, it takes all those words, searches through the very complicated mathematics that I don't understand, and then starts with a noise palette. Basically, it's just a 512 by 512 image with just your normal kind of staticky noise. And then it starts working, like doing passes and passes over this noise, refining it, getting it closer and closer to what it's being asked to produce, and then it produces it. And that is one of the first things that I think I had to kind of learn that I wasn't aware of, is AI art doesn't just mix and match images, which is kind of what I thought it did initially. It does fully recreate things from scratch. It can be prompted to basically copy things if you want, or if you give it the right parameters, or you make the parameters too strict. But if you're just using the technology as intended, you are recreating an entirely new piece of art. You're not tracing over things. You're not like taking 100% of an image and just slapping it on another. It is actually creating it, which is kind of the more surprising part of it that I've had to kind of wrap my head around.
And so when you're uh, talk through at a bird's eye view of you're in front of your computer, you're starting up the client, and you're going to make an image for the game.
Okay. So the way that I have it set up, again, a lot of this is going to be through this stability AI or stable diffusion lens. I have my local hardware that I start up, and it runs through all the things. It updates the most recent build of certain things to make sure it's all working as intended. And there's a whole slew of settings and things that you can adjust, which are way past again the scope of this video. But I have, through my process of using this technology, I guess is the best term to use, I've figured out what I enjoy seeing, what key phrases I use, what things I put in the negative prompts, which is things you don't want included in the final image. And so I've made basically a short list of like, if I'm trying to make a character portrait, here's 20 words that I use no matter what, and then I add the description that I need onto the front, and then work from there. And there's a lot more refining past that point. But as far as getting that initial image, I will sit down, kind of type out everything I need, make sure everything's set up, and I'll run 1 or 2 images to make sure it's in the general ballpark. And then I slap it to like 10 images, and I let it kind of hit me with a bunch of different attempts at something. And I would pull that down and, refine it again and kind of narrow it closer and closer. Or if it's a broad sweeping shot of a landscape where I don't need everything to be incredibly particular, it might be ready to go then, though that is rare. And then I just upscale it so that it's not the 512 by 512, and then use the image. So it's a lot more direct than I think most people assume. But there is a bit more to it than just, going to a website, typing in a prompt, and spitting out an image. So that is doable to some extent currently.
You and I sat down one day to make the character portrait
Mhm.
for my character in our current campaign, Talora Tales, and you were driving while I was watching your stream, and you were asking me questions, and we were looking at the results together. And the the ability to what I was impressed by, and was what was new to me, was the ability to take one of those results, put it back in the inbox,
Mhm.
and basically show the program a part of the picture to focus on, or a
Mhm.
part of the picture to ignore or to remove. Um, I was particularly impressed with the way that you added a coil of rope and a grappling hook, uh, to the way that you told it to add a coil of rope and a grappling hook,
Mhm.
um, which was basically by pasting clip art over the inbox image, and then it interpreted that and incorporated it into the results so that it looked like it, you know, was belonged in the picture.
Mhm.
Um, I'm not sure where I'm going with this other than just describing, like, it was a cool process, and the ability to find a result that we liked and put it back in and continue to refine it and change it, um, was pretty impressive. It felt pretty futuristic. Um, why did you choose this particular client? Why did you
Mhm.
choose uh this
Programmer, yeah,
this program? Yeah, why
yeah.
did you choose this one over the others? And in what other ways have you been using it for Tell Tales?
So, kind of starting from the beginning, because I also do want to comment on like the process. I am, I guess, very clearly an AI art, I don't want to say advocate, but I definitely fall on the side of the fence or the side of the argument that is, this is a very cool tool and it's very impressive and it's actually pretty useful. And the main kind of foundation that that comes from is it has allowed me, who, I have a relative amount of art skill, nothing super impressive, but I do use my own art in our game a fair amount of the time. And so it can take someone like me, who I would never professionally, try and draw a character up because it's not a skill that I possess. But I can more or less, sketch out a frame of a character or a piece of clothing of a character or the general shape of a character if I need to, and then have that enhanced. And while a lot of people would say that's cheating or that is, skirting the rules or whatever you want to say, there is nothing that can describe almost kind of like the childlike joy of taking something in your brain and just having it appear in front of you. It is this like strange, addicting rush of just like, I can actually now tangibly build my imagination before my eyes and then share it with other people. And that was the rabbit hole I quickly fell into, is when I was building up Telora to start our campaign and I was like thinking of all these different places across the world and the continent that you guys are going to. It's like, oh yeah, I don't have to describe this to you. I can actually sit down, spend a little bit of time on my computer and build a scene to help really show you guys the land you're walking into. And while I don't want that to replace everything, because a DM needs something to ramble on about during the game, there is a reason we include art in our tabletop role playing games. There's a reason we have character art in our tabletop role playing games. It's to help bridge the gap between my imagination and your imagination and the other player's imagination of what's going on and what the scene looks like. And it just opens up endless opportunities to do that. When I'm sure, again, this whole topic can shift rather drastically. It could even change in the legal sense, where it's maybe potentially going to be banned to use this technology in the future. But currently, as we have it right now, It is a source of inspiration that I use when I'm stuck. I need to write something. It is a source of joy that I use for you guys to help present you with stuff that you can have fun with and enjoy. And my kind of tail end of this is if you're just using this for your personal game and you and your buds and it is adding to the game, I wouldn't feel any sort of like guilt over it. One of the main reasons I fell into this, kind of answering the second part of your topic, is when I was building up to Laura Tales and I was trying to make it look as appealing as possible or as professional as possible. I was trying to find art or artists that I could work with, that I could have do the, different places that we're going to and the maps that we're doing. And I was basically stuck with, yeah, you don't have the money to have a full-time artist for your hobby D&D game, and you also don't have the time to hand draw everything or learn to draw things yourself. So what are some of the other things you can do? And to basically through trial and error or just kind of exploring, stumbled upon AI art. And I was like, oh, this is probably decent enough for me to be okay with. And then I went down the rabbit hole and it's like, oh, this is far past decent. This could actually service what I'm trying to do. And that's, I guess, where we are today. I started with Midjourney, but I did the kind of free trial version of it just to kind of get a feel for this whole process. And then I quickly realized that I was probably going to buy the high tier of Midjourney to produce as many images as I want and that kind of thing. And then I started looking into like, what are some of the alternatives? And then there was the ones that you can locally install on your machine, which is something I would always lean towards. Like if you have a video game, I would much rather have an installation of it on my game versus attaching to some server that might go down in 5 years. So then I went through the process of figuring that out and making sure I had the right hardware and setting all that up and, following the updates of that to try and make sure I'm using it as efficiently as possible. And that's how I landed on Stable Diffusion. And I've been using that for, I guess, maybe 2 months now, maybe a little bit more than that. And I'm kind of stuck there until something changes, which it very well might. Stable Diffusion changes no matter what, but again, the whole sphere of AI art could change at any moment. But for now, that's what I use, and it is a very awe-inspiring tool, which I don't really use often in real life. I usually use it in just D&D, so.
How demanding is it in terms of hardware?
It is getting more and more I don't want to say approachable. What's the runnable, accessible? Thank you. Because people are seeing this technology and like, oh, I have this rinky-dink old Dell computer. I want to run it on. Can I? And some guy in, I don't know, like Romania or something's like, yeah, I got you, bud. Here's a GIMP version you can run. So there's a lot of different versions, but right now I think the minimum specs that you're looking for is you're probably talking about well. First off, it's mainly only NVIDIA cards that it's working with well. You can run it on AMD cards, but there's a whole thing you got to get over to actually make that happen. And then even then, results are less appealing, I suppose, or straightforward. So you're probably looking at like a 2000 series NVIDIA card or newer. 8 gigabytes of RAM is what they usually recommend. Some of the aspects won't run unless you do some adjustments to make it run. But it is getting more and more open as we go because more and more people want to use it. But yeah, better the hardware, faster it goes. And, the more iterations you can run, the quicker you'll refine your own kind of process. So I run it on a GTX 1080 Ti, which is certainly not a fantastic card in the current day and age, but it's decent enough. So I've been having no real issue with it, and it just chugs right through. So.
And you've mentioned a little bit of like it is sort of a skill that there's some practice involved. And when we were working on the character portrait, it wasn't perfect in the first place. It took several iterations as we were sort of narrowing in on something that looked right. And all together, what did it take us? Did it take us an hour,
It was
90
about
minutes?
2, yeah, 2
Uh,
hours.
and even then, like we got to the point where it's like, that's good.
Mhm.
That's a good image. Uh, for some reason, it was hung up on wanting to make it like this reddish purple, this
Mhm.
burgundy color overall. Like the clothes were really reddish purple, and we just couldn't seem to get it to use any other colors. So we would get a page of results, and there would be different heads, different feet, different hands, but the clothes are always that color, and
Mhm.
that was a funny quirk.
Yeah, so, like, the best it's difficult to describe, like, having a skill using these AI tools because there is a very wide range there. But when you get down to, like, the example that we're using of building a character concept art, there's a very specific image they have in their mind. And while there might be some variation in, like, how long their hair is or what exact skin tone they are, they more or less have this image they want to produce, and you are working to produce that image. Versus there are, the side of AI art of, like, I don't even know what I want to make. Here's some fun words. Show me what you got. And that's a very different approach. But when you're trying to be precise and very detail orientated, which people are going to make fun of me for saying that, with AI art, there is a process of rendering it out, bringing it back in, modifying it, tweaking it, knowing what things to change, what things not to change, what prompts you want to use, what settings you want to use, sending it back in, getting the result over and over and over. And it is very different than sitting down with a tablet and drawing and tweaking and erasing and redrawing, but it is more or less the same process in a very different way. Which is why it still kind of scratches that itch of, like, creating art for me, because you are creating art, but you're not spending that lengthy period of time, which again is kind of the point of contention. Um, but it's more than just pressing a button, and there is your own input. Like, the best example I would probably show for this is Quinn has this kind of, like, semi half elongated ear because he's a half elf, and you didn't want to have, like, the full point. You didn't want it to be human because you wanted it to be something, right? So we went through multiple iterations of it, kind of giving you a longer one, a shorter one, and covering it with the hair, and back and forth and back and forth. And we eventually landed on this ear that is, like, halfway, mostly rounded, and is clearly not a human ear, but clearly not an elf ear. And that was you deciding that that was what you were looking for, and that is what you liked, and that's what we picked and went with. And so while the AI art did generate that, it was your influence and your decision making in your mind who then went, that's it. That's what I want. That's what I want to display and have on my character. And then that was kind of the process for every different part. So it, again, is the same thing as drawing or trying to build a character in your mind, but you are playing with different Legos, I guess, potentially.
This is more of a comment more so than a question. With respect to the fact that this is a divisive subject, people have strong feelings about text to image generators. Uh, In a world where we all get along, I thought it would be really cool to use one of these to get an image that is basically what you imagined, and then take your generated image to an actual artist and say, here's my draft. uh you can see the major elements, now make it just right. And I want to do that one day. I'd be afraid to do it right now because I would think I don't want to insult anybody. I feel like the artist that you would take that to, there's a non-zero chance that they would be like,
How
"You want
dare
me
you?
to you want me to clean up behind your AI artist? I don't
Hmm.
think so. No soup for you." Um, but I've gone through that process myself. I've also commissioned artwork from a human being, and that the beginning of that process is, what do you want it to look like? What do you want in it? What the colors and the shapes
What
and
pose?
and as especially if you yourself are not familiar with a lot of the theory, that could be a frustrating process for one or both of you.
Hmm.
So that, I feel like it would be fun to see that turnaround, or to see, here's the here's the cheese food product. Now now make this fancy, make it
Mhm.
good. But I don't know. That's just something that I think would be nice one day, but I also know that uh there's some folks who have a lot at stake. Um
It's
but at the same time the technology is here
Mhm.
as well. And so that's why I open the video by saying support artists, because that's all you can do.
Mhm.
This is not this genie is not going back in the bottle. No genie ever goes back in the bottle. Um, we can think of examples of technology that billion-dollar corporations tried to bury, and I think in every case they've been unsuccessful. They have postponed it in some cases for decades, but eventually, like a weed in the sidewalk, it's going to come back up. It's going to come out. Um, what are I don't think I have any other questions right now. What are your closing thoughts?
So, since we are talking about this, I do want to represent both sides because I have been listening to both. I consume so much like AI art news and updates and stuff. It's not even remotely funny. But the kind of famous video against AI art that's kicking around right now is done by a guy named Steven Zapata Art, and it's about a 45-minute video of him. He is probably the most emotionally charged person I've listened to on the subject. He uses a lot of like really creative and somewhat inspiring words to try and like paint the art community in this kind of heroic light, and AI art is this kind of dark and skulking evil creature. And I'm not exaggerating. He really does use some of that terminology, but he is a lot of the artist's voice are kind of thrown behind him. There's also one done by Sam Does Art, which is a much shorter video and has a few accuracy problems because he didn't look into the technology a lot before he made the video, but again expresses a lot of the concern and emotion from the art community. And why I highlight both of those, and I have watched more than those, but those are the big ones. The main thing that I think is driving this huge outcry or this huge reaction is automation's coming for everything. We've known this for a while now, like automation in industry and automation in driving and transportation. It's everywhere, and people have lost their jobs and they've phased and they've adapted, and it's kind of been a process we've been witnessing over and over again. The one thing everyone has always said is, but it will never replace artists. It will never craft a sculpture. It will never write a book. You know, you can't remove that piece of human soul. Like a computer can't recreate that. Now a computer has. And the part of the initial video that I referenced, which is kind of the overall scope of AI art, reveals that an actual AI art piece got put into a show without it being, labeled as such or without the judges knowing what the technology was, and it won the show because the judges could not, discern the difference, right? And that's the point right there that all the artists are afraid of is when AI art replaces the artist entirely. And that's what we're seeing, where a community that was very convinced that they were safe from automation and that this would never occur is now facing the reality that they are having to adapt. And while I don't want to say that AI or not AI artists aren't going to be, completely put out of a job or they're never going to exist or there's no creativity left in the world, which is a lot of the internet discourse going on, art is going to change in a very significant way. Like only the past month or so, a very popular tool that is being used is AI art being fed into Photoshop. So an artist will draw a very basic scene of a stream and some trees and some rocks, have the AI art come in, clean it up. They do the minor adjustments right there in Photoshop, extend the image, draw a person where they want a person, have the AI art do the person and then make the adjustments, and they are producing images 4 or 5 times faster than they normally would. And they've adapted and they're using it, and that's going to put them ahead of other artists. And that's just the nature of the beast of how our society churns. So it's a very interesting, potentially heartbreaking, and somewhat strange situation we find ourselves in. But it's here and it's not going anywhere. So
My my closing thought, I think, two closing thoughts. One on this subject in general is our society has a long overdue conversation to have about um, people's livelihoods and ethics and um, the fact that automation is expanding. Uh, there's a long overdue conversation to have about what that should mean, what that should look like. Um, what 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 a job means, what
Mhm.
it means to have a job, what a job is, what that what that even looks like into the future. And until that, all of whether it's whether it's a fight on the internet over text to image generators and human beings, or between workers in the manufacturing space who are dealing with CNC machines and 3D printing and robots. These are all tiny, these are microcosms. These are tiny, very specific versions of the bigger conversation that we actually should be having uh, about how to make people's lives livable and meaningful, and coexist with this technology.
Mhm. I will,
My gaming related closing thought is that it has added to our game.
Mhm.
I really enjoyed having that custom artwork for my character, um, in a way that I didn't feel like I was imposing on anyone. I don't care how many times I have to tell the machine to draw it again. Make it again. That was wrong.
Mhm.
The machine doesn't care. I can do that all day. Um, I'm not going to swear off of having art commissioned. I'm not
Mhm.
going to stop having art commissioned. But when you have art commissioned, a lot of the times you're on a waiting list for weeks or months, and then you are waiting for weeks for the artwork to be completed.
Mhm.
It took us 2 hours, but it took us 2 hours from nothing to finished character portrait.
Yeah.
So I don't need to sit here and list all the ways that is a fun tool to have for a DM. Uh, and I don't. There aren't. I'll say this. I don't think there are enough artists. I don't think there are enough human artists to supply all of the tabletop gaming tables with custom art.
Yeah, I mean,
So
it basically comes down to it is something that is enhancing our game. And if it enhances our game and it adds to your guys' enjoyment, and I'm not sitting there, clubbing baby seals to death, it's a tool I'm going to use. And that's what it really comes down to.
anything else, sir, before we close it up?
I will throw out there, since I did do the research and have read them myself, a lot of the discussion that you kind of brought up before about automation and the bigger conversation is probably going to happen with a lot of the legality around AI art. So currently, the two big things, one of them just happened 2 days ago. There's a class action lawsuit between some prominent artists and Stability AI. And I will, again, link these down in the description below. And that's interesting because that's an ongoing thing. They have a whole website for it, and their explanation of what AI art it is a little bit disingenuous, but they tried, so it's certainly better than just slapping it on there. Then there is Getty Images is also, I think it's not a class action, it is a proper lawsuit. I think it's copyright infringement is what they're going with. Stability AI yet again. So those two lawsuits are probably going to direct this conversation or this technology in a very big way. And whether it falls in the favor of AI art or falls in the favor of stricter copyright, that's going to be it. That's going to be a lot of the deciding factors. So if you want to keep up to date with the conversation and see where it's going, check in with those, keep up with that. I'm curious to see where it goes, but yeah, it's a strange time to be alive.
It's it's really weird. It's really weird to think like a I'm not a drawing artist. I've always fantasized about being one. Having said that, it's really weird to think about Getty Images being the hero here for all of the artists out there. Like,
Mm-hmm.
what? Really?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, their whole thing's gonna fall on the data scraping thing, which is a whole rabbit hole. So, well, it's not, they're not doing it to save artists, I assure you.
No.
They're doing it to save their bottom line. But it may very well assist an artist having more control over their copyright material. But we'll see.
Well, head down to those comments and fill them up. I want to have this discussion. I want to learn more. I want to know what I've got wrong. I want to be convinced. I'm not. My opinion is not settled on this subject. We're all just trying to figure out, you know,
Mm,
day to day.
yeah,
So put something in those comments and like and subscribe, of course. I know this was a little bit of a heavier topic or a little more granular, but um, it's something that I thought it was time for us to talk about. But once we sat down and went through that process, it was like we have to say something about this.
yeah.
So
That is actually my final closing thoughts. After my closing thoughts is, if you are in the discourse of this thing of AI art, for the love of God, be cordial about it. It is insane on both sides. Both AI art advocates and artists get so nasty. Please, there is a civil discussion to be had, and I very much would lean that direction.
Grandma says you catch more flies with honey, and it's true.
Yeah,
You don't win hearts and minds by beating them over the head.
precisely. But yeah, that is our shout into the void, and we will see what we get in return.
Until next time.
Have a good one.